Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. This is Af Malhotra on Straight Talk with Af. Now, once again, I'm here right in front of you for the next hour or so to bring you an individual who, in this case today, I met with many months back, pretty much accidentally at an event. And he had a great aura, he had a great energy, and as you know, that sort of draws me into people. And I then realized why he had a great aura, because he has been, is, and will be on a significant mission in his life to discover how cancer, to a large extent, can be prevented, or at least a blood test that can early detect cancer so people don't have to die unnecessarily. People don't detect it later on in its journey and feel helpless and lost. And we all know about people who've passed because of cancer. We all have people who are close to us who've lost their fight with cancer, those who've won their fight with cancer and still around and can tell the story. And so it was incumbent upon me to bring today the brilliant Ashish Thripathi onto my show. Ashish, welcome to Straight Talk with Af.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. It was such a pleasure, that conversation that we had in UK, and I'm so glad to be here with you.
Yeah, so am I. It's going to be a fantastic conversation. And anyone who, God forbid, is suffering from, has suffered from cancer, knows someone who's had cancer, this is a mandatory watch for you, because this is truly a revolution that Ashish is involved in. Ashish is the CEO of ZAR Labs, which is an organization that he will tell you a ton about. And of course, this innovation is just blowing my mind. I've done my homework on it, and I just cannot believe that it hasn't happened before. I just cannot believe it's not happened before the way they're doing it. And I'm so happy that you are doing it. And we'll talk more about that in a moment. Before we do so, as you know, we love to talk about people and their personal stories. And before we get into the venture and the breakthrough, let's talk about Ashish. So who are you, man? Like, what's your background? Where do you live? How did you get into all of this right from the beginning?
So, my name is Ashish Thripathi. I actually come from an investment banking background. So, I worked in Australia, US, and UK for a very long part of my career, and came back to India back in 2008 with
Right.
the India Shining story. Worked with vendors, E&Y, and was the national TMT head of Edelweiss, three of the largest investment banks in India. And to be honest with you, my life was going well. I have three kids, and I'm married to an Australian. My life was going quite well, except my father was working on molecular medicine. It
Right.
was a very cutting edge space, and he was working on a molecule that could actually have a big impact on many types of cancer. Right? It was a drug, and what he wanted was, he was trying to actually raise some capital. Given my background, look, all four of us, there are four siblings, and all four of us are well to do. But given my background in investment banking, I tried to help him raise capital. And it was interesting. Every time I talked about his research with my colleagues in the West, right, they would just go, "This is cutting edge." And every time I talked to private equity firms in India, they couldn't understand what he was doing.
Mm.
And finally, I did land up raising capital for him. But the investors insisted that they wanted me to join as the CEO, because they said, "Look, there's a key man risk here. Your father is in his late 70s, and this is going to need international capital. So if you're going to convince us to invest, we want skin in the game from you."
Right.
And to be very honest with you, I genuinely believed in what my father was doing. It looked like a very, very risky choice at that particular point in time, but it was something that I was passionate about, and that's how I got into this particular into this play. And I'll tell you more about it as the conversation goes on.
Yeah, amazing. So tell us a bit about, so your dad was a doctor or something, or was it just a passion, or?
He was actually a nanotechnology expert, right?
Right.
He was working on a drug, and the breakthrough was around delivery mechanism for that drug, right? That significantly increased the viability of the drug. And let me step back. You know that there are three global firsts that we claim. This is the first all cancer blood test, right?
Right.
And I say this with some understanding of the subject. There are 200 types of cancer, 3,000 subtypes of cancer. So cancer is a complex disease.
Mm.
Not only can we detect them, we can detect it early because we can detect it when it is PET negative. That's stage zero, not stage one. And at this stage, from a blood test, we can tell you that you are at imminent threat of cancer, but we can tell you which one. This is breast, this is lung, this is liver, straight from a blood test. That's
Right.
claim. Claim two, this is the first prognostic test for cancer. From a blood test, I can tell you you do not have cancer, but I can tell you that you're not at risk of cancer for the next 1 year because we know the pace at which these markers grow. So if you're within a safe zone, we know that the fastest cancer can't go from here to a tumor stage in 1 year. You can see the use case of a test like that. It's a blood test all of us have to do once a year, and we either catch cancer at stage one or before when it is infinitely more curable. And claim three, and this is a very interesting one for oncologists, we are able to give you the mutation and dysfunctional pathway readings that you get from a biopsy of the tumor tissue, but we give it to you from a blood sample. Now, why is that important? Latest research in the US shows that as soon as you do a biopsy, you speed up the activity of the tumor. More
Interesting.
importantly,
Okay.
sometimes the driver mutation is coming from a second tumor. So if I do a biopsy of this one, I don't get that reading. I can give you the mutation readings and the dysfunctional pathway readings of all these tumors straight from a blood sample, right?
Mm.
Now, when you first hear this, what's got to be playing in your mind is what's the science? And we have disclosed the science. We've already got our US patent. We got published in Oxford Academy Stem Cell Journal. But the underlying technology is not, it's not that we are magicians, nor are we, the smartest people in the world. Actually, we got lucky. We were a drug company that was working on a cancer drug. While studying the pathways, we realized the drug is acting on a stem cell. When we went and looked, we realized that the stem cell gets an epigenetic change, which creates a cancer stem cell. The cancer stem cell creates cancer cells. 1 billion cancer cells form a tumor. Once the tumor forms, it sheds CTC, ctDNA, cell-free RNA, all resultant markers of the tumor. The whole world was looking at this end of the puzzle, and
Right.
we had stumbled onto a causative marker that is showing up in the blood a good 12 to 18 months before the tumor even forms, right?
Wow.
We
Right.
have actually already tested, I mean, we did a blinded study on 25 cancers, but we have tested it on 50 odd cancers now. The product has already been launched in India, and in the next 2 weeks, it is expected to be launched in the UK as well. So we're very proud of this. But what really matters is our Western clinical studies. We have 2 studies going on with NHS right now. We expect to have the results done by March, April of this year. And once that is done, there's going to be a lot more talk and chatter about our technology.
So I'm going to come to that. I'm going to come to the rollout and many more questions about why you do what you do and why is it so different apart from the three claims. We always find when people are doing extraordinary work, there is a personal reason for it. And it's not just about solving world problems because you want to solve world problems. Sometimes it's something that's close to home. I certainly found when right now I'm on the journey of diversity, equity, inclusion. As you know, I'm building the first ever AI large language model in that space. And it's a personal thing, being a ethnic man with a family that is ethnic in the United Kingdom. I certainly want to eradicate any form of unnecessary prejudice and discrimination. And I'm seeing global companies aren't making decisions with data, like you. You're the scientist here, and that's missing. So I'm solving that problem. What's your drive? Why are you doing this? Why don't you stick with investment banking?
Look, we lost, like so many people, we lost someone very, very important to us because of cancer. Look, I do come from a famous family in India. My twin brother, or BBC calls him the Tolkien of India. He's written the fastest and the second fastest selling book series in Indian publishing history. He was also, until recently, the director of Nehru Center, and he's made documentaries. Highly respected, individual from India.
He was on
Uh,
the show, of course, just a few months ago, Amish Tripathi.
Yep.
Yeah,
And the other very famous person from my family was my brother-in-law. He was the Director General of Police. Um, one of the most inspiring people that I have met in my life.
right.
Fought fourth stage cancer for 2 years, and unfortunately, we lost him. About 4.5 years back. And the reality is that he would make a lot of poignant statements where we lost him quite tragically. But something that he would always say is that he had a jocular way of actually explaining a particular point in time and point a message. And I remember a couple of weeks before he passed away, I was sitting with him and he said, Ashish, have you heard, have you seen, some obscene number? I don't know, but it was some 100,000 pounds or something, just disappeared in a second. And I said, no. And, well, not 100,000 pounds, maybe about 40, 50,000 pounds, but he just picked up his chemo pill, and had it. And then he started laughing. And then he just said that, look, at least we can afford it. I mean, what are the poor even supposed to do, right? And to be very candid with you, we named this marker, this test, after my brother-in-law. And the reason being that we really believe the only real solution with cancer is detecting it early. And our goal is to actually make it affordable and make it available, make this test available to every individual. Because we genuinely believe that if everyone does this test once a year, we will turn cancer into an early stage disease, right? Infinitely more curable. And the point is that if we achieve that, I think we would have achieved a great purpose. So I was doing investment banking. It was a respectable, good life. But in all honesty, the person who convinced me to join in this company was actually my brother-in-law. And because when the investors had made this offer, I had spoken to my brother-in-law, and he said that, Ashish, there are very few people who get the opportunity to pay off their debts in their life.
Right.
And one debt which is very, very difficult to pay off is a debt to your parents, right? And my father was a brilliant man, but to be very candid with you, what he said was that what you're doing is going to actually, by helping him, you're going to actually leave a legacy for yourself and for the family. And if it doesn't work out, it doesn't work out. The whole family is there. But I think, this will be a great achievement. Now, it's interesting how life plays out, because we actually made a pivot. We were working on a molecule until we realized that there was this diagnostic marker, and we immediately understood that this is the bigger breakthrough, right? But having said that, this is important to me for two people. One, my brother-in-law, because while the test wasn't there for him, right? I do hope it'll help a lot more people. And solving cancer is a wonderful vision to have. The other person that I unfortunately lost a couple of years back was my father. He was a incredible person in his own right. 80 plus, and he was still so driven. In working on breakthroughs, leaving a legacy, and he was working right to the last day, right? He would actually, whenever he read books, he never needed to underline. Wherever the markings stop, that's where he had read it, right? And I knew that. And he had actually just put his book down with his last note on the Siddhartha Mukherjee book that he was reading, and he passed away peacefully. And but what mattered to me was that he saw his work published.
Right.
And so for both me and for my elder brother, he's working with the firm now as well. It's important. We want to actually make this make this a legacy for both these two great individuals. So it's important.
Beautiful, beautiful. So and that's incredible with your brother-in-law and your father, two very important, pivotal people, it sounds like, in your life, and who have given you the go-ahead. I think you're fortunate enough to even get the time, and of course the conversation was had. Conversations are powerful. So these exchanges are what make us human, right, and keep us going on a good path, hopefully. So you've had that impetus. And the last time I spoke with you, this is what I find fascinating, because you keep grafting. You of course articulate what you do beautifully and simply. I think, for even those who are not clinicians, which I think is important, given that the sufferers or the patients may not all be doctors, probably likely not. And you were going to do something with the UK NHS at that point. This is about a year ago or so. Tell us what's happened since then, because I think, my audience here at Straight Talk are global, many from the US, many from the UK, Europe, and coming and growing in India as well. Certainly for some of my friends and people that I love here in the UK, the question will be, well, Ashish is doing incredible stuff, but can we actually get this test done, or is it only for a certain market? Tell us a little bit about that progress you're making on this side. I think you touched on it briefly.
Look, like I told you, my goal is that all 8 billion of us will do this test once a year, and we will turn cancer to an early stage disease.
Right.
Before I answer your NHS question, if I can just explain something for your audience, which I think will be helpful. If I can just make you think about, cancer is a geometrically growing disease. So one cell becomes two, two becomes four, four becomes 16, 16 becomes 256, and so on and so forth, right?
Right.
Now, what we call detectable cancer, right, is a 1 cubic centimeter tumor, right? Because that's when it becomes visible on a PET scan. A lot of people don't realize that a PET scan, it does not, a tumor is not visible on a PET scan if the tumor is small. It needs a certain size before it becomes detectable.
Okay.
Do you know how many cells, cancer cells, are there in a 1 cubic centimeter tumor?
Go on.
1 billion, right?
Wow.
In a geometrically growing disease. Now, the sad fact is that if I was to draw a line where I said this point is non-cancer, the first point is detectable cancer. Well, I've already answered your question that detectable cancer is 1 cubic centimeter, right? Because the gold standard is a PET scan.
Right.
Third point is cancer with symptoms. The sad fact is that you don't actually detect cancer at detectable cancer, right? Because each PET scan is equal to 70,000 X-rays.
Right.
It is so no doctor is telling you go and do a PET scan every year, right? It's essentially radioactive glucose. I inject it into me because the tumor is growing so quickly. It wants the sugar, and now because it's radioactive, when I scan, I can see it lights up, right? This is where the tumor is. This is where the tumor is,
Right.
right? But essentially, you do not detect it at detectable cancer because a doctor tells you to go do a PET scan when you have a symptom, and the symptom comes much later, right?
Right.
And effectively, that is the reason. And let's say the fourth point is fourth stage, right? The truth is that you actually detect cancer at a detectable cancer with symptoms somewhere between that point and fourth stage, right? Which is why global data, even today, 50% of the cancers are detected at stage 3, stage 4. Now, coming back to that point that it's a geometrically growing disease, right? We are not able to detect it till it is very late, right? And then when we detect it, right, we go, oh my God, now what do
Right.
we do? Right?
Right.
Because the medication that you're giving, more often than not, is as toxic, right? It hammers the tumor, but it also hammers you, right? Now, effectively, what is our purpose? We are a non-invasive blood test. What we've realized is that because we are looking at a causative marker, we can in fact give a risk assessment and therefore track, right, cancer before the tumor is detectable, and then detect it post the detectable stage.
Right.
The idea is to drive people. What we envision is that people will be driven towards actually doing a PET scan closer to detectable cancer. And just one particular point, a couple of years back in UK, there was a study done on lung cancer, right?
Mhm.
And please forgive me if my data is slightly off, but what it said was that if you detected lung cancer early, the average cost to the patient, right, was 5,000 points. And I'm assuming, it was stage 1, stage 2. That
Right.
was early, right? The average cost was 5,000 pounds, and the chances of survival beyond 5 years was 95%.
Right.
And if you detect it late, right,
Yeah. Yeah.
which is stage 3, stage 4, right, the average chances of the cost to the patient was 150,000 pounds, right, and the average chances of survival beyond 5 years was 5%, right?
Wow. Yeah.
Now understand why we are so driven towards our cause. We want to drive people to actually get it detected early, because that's the real solution, right? Now, and this is a common test, and there's a scientific reason for why we believe it works on every cancer. But for full disclosure, till now we've tested it only on 50 cancers, right? But there's a scientific reason, because we believe that the cancer stem cell is common to all cancers,
Right.
right? That's the
Right.
theoretical paper that we have actually put out in the public domain. Now, coming back to your answer, right? We had already finished 1,000-patient study, right? But as you can imagine, at that particular point in time, right? This was an Indian study. It was
Right.
with 25 different cancers, simple design, 500 cancers, 500 non-cancers, right? All we got was a blood sample with a code on it. From this, we were able to detect all non-cancers. Remember, we get a reading for non-cancer, right? You know, when you look at the CTC, ctDNA, that's what other liquid biopsy companies are doing. The absence of tumor cells in the blood is indicative of non-cancer. Absence of evidence is not the same as evidence of absence. We get a reading from our cells of non-cancer. We get
Right.
an elevated reading for imminent cancer, and we get a still elevated reading for cancer presence, right? Which is why we are getting such high sensitivity, compared to all these other liquid biopsy companies. Now, having said this, right, what was told to us very early was that we need a Western ratification, right? And we had actually talked with CROs. We were looking at a US study. We were speaking to a couple of countries. But to be very honest with you, NHS was the most forthcoming, right? We started a study with Imperial, and then we were approached, right, and we got a grant from NIHR for a second study with NHS for lung cancer. Two very good pieces of advice that were given to us by NHS is, firstly, don't claim imminent cancer just yet, which is why if you look at our product, we claim risk assessment, right?
Right.
We
Right.
talk about imminent cancer. And the advice was that as soon as you claim imminent cancer, you will need to do longitudinal studies, right? Which can take a couple of years. And what they said is that the product right now, if you can just tell us cancer present, right?
Right.
Cancer
Right.
absence, that itself is big, right? You do not need to claim imminent cancer. That will happen over time, right? So our logic was that we basically made it into a risk assessment test, right? But the whole idea is that we want to give a risk assessment where people can proactively look at a or can actually assess their risk from a PET scan perspective, right? Earlier, rather than what happens right now, right? And we expect both these. And the other piece of advice that NHS had given was that don't make it about all cancers, because if you make it about all cancers, then
Yeah.
again, you need to do larger studies, which will take time. Do it cancer by cancer. And
Yeah.
that's the advice that we have taken in the West, right? Having said this, in India, we have already launched it as a all cancer, risk assessment test. But in the UK, we're going to go cancer by cancer.
How does one do this? Is this usable now if I want to do one for me and my family? How do we do it? I'm in London.
Yeah. So in London, it's going to be starting in the matter of a couple of weeks, right? Having said this, right, please appreciate that, at this point in time, it's going to be a private service, right?
Yeah,
Which is good,
sure.
right? But what we expect is that once we get the NHS trials done, we have been advised that, look, if you can replicate your data, right, this is the need of the hour. You must have heard that with the NHS in particular, last three prime ministers have actually gone on record to say that if we do not solve for cancer, right, NHS will go under, right?
Right.
So there is a very real focus in the NHS, right, to actually be able to detect cancer, right? Now, let me give you some data which you might find interesting, right? Uh, 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 Again, you may have to actually, because this was told to me by someone very, very senior up in NHS. But what I was told was that, over the last 4 years, right, there hasn't been even one detection of lung cancer in all of Wales and all of Scotland at stage 1 and stage 2. They're detecting it late, right? And why is that? You know that the gatekeeper is actually a GP, right, in NHS. And when you go to a GP, this is not to blame the GP. The reality is the gatekeeper, right? If you just got a cough symptom, he says, go home, have an aspirin. When you come back, right, You are then you set up an appointment, right, which takes 2 weeks to get an X-ray, then 2 weeks for the results to come back. Then you do a PET scan, then you do a biopsy, right? So best practice is 63 days from when you suspect to when you confirm cancer. And I have been told with people that understand the system that in many parts of NHS, it is taking 75 to 90 days.
Yeah.
But it's not even the worst part of the situation, right? The worst part is that go to any hospital, right? Whether you go to Imperial, you go to Manchester, all of them have a huge backlog of imaging, so PET scans, right? And effectively, oncologists are complaining that, look, we have cases where we can actually make out that the patient has got cancer, but we cannot start treatment
Right.
because radiological evidence has not happened. Now, why is this? Because for every 100 PET scans that you do, there will only be 5 or 6 positive. And this is global
That's
data.
right.
It's
That's
true
right.
of UK, this is true of every other country. Now, what unfortunately that means is that we've got this huge backlog, right? And what the system is saying is that, look, we need some way to prioritize, right? Because if we cannot prioritize, the people that need, right, to be detected early are not being detected early. And this is showing in the NHS data, where if you look at the survival rates, right, for a first world country, UK is actually quite poor on a lot of those records, right?
Mm.
And we believe our technology could help, right? Having said this, right, what you've got to respect. I mean, for someone who's coming from India, what you've got to respect about UK is that they have a very systematic way of going about the process. And at this point in time, we are doing the clinical studies. Once the clinical data comes out, right? I've been told by many parts of NHS that, look, it is in our interest to fast pace this, right? Because it's the need of the hour, right? And the important thing is to get into NHS with one type of cancer. And then as time goes on, you get into other cancers as well, because that's the beauty of this particular test, that has an application on multiple cancers.
What's the price points here? Are you comfortable telling us what it is, either globally or locally? Because it's all the economics as well is a very important factor.
So, the reason I haven't stated this publicly is because understand that the regulatory hurdles are different in different countries, right?
Right.
So the challenge that you have got, okay, is that firstly, the sensitivity with the sequencing method is higher, right, than the PCR method,
Hmm.
right? And the challenge that you have in countries like UK, as I understand, or Europe, right, is that it is easier for you to go down the sequencing path than the PCR part, because you
Can you
still
just explain that for those who don't know what sequencing versus PCR is?
so qPCR, right? It's a PCR test, right?
Right.
Where we are looking at a limited number of markers. There's still a cost involved because we are actually looking at where, there are specific process of enriching our cells, right? Because we are interested basically in a molecular marker, right? But when you do a PCR test is technically cheaper, right? Because you're looking at only primer and probes, but you're looking at a limited number of markers,
Right.
right? When you look at sequencing, you're doing NGS sequencing. So you must have heard of genome sequencing,
Hmm.
like the whole exome study that was done in the
Hmm.
UK, etc. Right?
That's right.
Now that is costlier, right? Because you get a lot more data, which actually increases our sensitivity, right? Because like I told you, cancer is a
Hmm.
complex disease, right? There are 200 different types of cancer, 3,000 subtypes of cancer. So if we can get a lot more data, our sensitivity increases, right? But having said that, right, purely as a screening test, we want to keep the pricing cheaper, right? The only challenge is that in the UK, before you can actually launch a product, you must have a CA mark and you must have a CE mark in mainland Europe,
Right.
right? Now, there are procedures that you have to go through before you can actually get it, right? And while we are doing this particular process, our partners in UK have said that we would like to launch this as a sequencing test right now because there are enough people who want this test done. We understand that it will be more expensive, right? But we want it launched because look, it can help people, right? And we all understand that if you can detect cancer early, it's good for that person, right? And especially post-COVID, there are a lot of people who are willing to actually do private tests, especially for
That's
something like.
right. Yeah.
So, as I understand it, right, we're pretty close to launching it in the UK as a private service, right?
Right.
But we'll first be going with the sequencing-based method, right? Though in due course, right, we are still working to get our regulatory approval so that we can actually make a a cheaper first step test.
Mhm.
And the logic being that first actually find out from a purely screening perspective whether cancer is absent, and the risk assessment being whether you are at moderate risk or you're at high risk. If you're at
Got it.
high risk or at imminent risk, right, then we can suggest a sequencing because we can even tell you which type of cancer. You understand? So it is not just about telling you that you're at imminent threat of cancer. We can tell you which one, right? So that is where this particular research will go. But having said this, right, it is not, these are some of the challenges that we're going through in different countries. In the
Yeah.
US, for instance, right, we are in talks with a couple of labs that want to again launch it, right? But there's a different regulatory hurdle out there altogether, right?
Hmm.
You
Hmm.
can launch it as a private service. So there are quite a few things that are actually being tried, right? And our agenda is that we want to get it into as many markets as we possibly can and as quickly as we possibly can.
One of the things I love about what you're doing, of course, and then of course the India angle is, I guess, born out of what, the Serum Institute did during COVID with vaccine production and the rollout of that production at such scale. And if you think about what you're doing with this particular innovation that you have, you said, in India we're pan, right? We're doing all sorts of cancers. So I am going to go ask you again, is there a price point in India? If I was living in Mumbai or Delhi or Bangalore, how much
Yeah.
does this test cost me in India? Forget about the UK, because of course that's complicated.
So look, in India, to be very honest with you, it'll be a couple of $100, right? While in the UK, it'll be more expensive,
Yeah,
right? In the US, it'll be more expensive. But the reason is that actually the regulatory hurdles are such that you have to follow different procedures over there,
yeah,
right?
yeah. No, I understand. I
And
understand.
please understand that the sensitivity of the test is lower in India, right? But once again, right? The truth is that even with that lower sensitivity, it is significantly higher than what other liquid biopsy companies are claiming, right? I
Yeah,
mean, in the UK, I believe NHS just in the middle of, I think, June, July of last year, right? That's 2023, put out a paper saying that no liquid biopsy company is getting more than 20% sensitivity at stage one, not more than 30% at stage one and stage two,
right.
right? I do not want to actually take names of competitors on the podcast because, look, we don't like bad mouthing competition because I genuinely believe anyone that's doing anything for cancer, right, is doing good work, right? But the challenge that they've got is that they're just not getting the sensitivity at stage one. They get it in stage four, right?
Right, right.
As any oncologist will tell you, well, we don't need to detect cancer at stage four. There are many other signals.
Yeah,
You need to detect
yeah,
at stage one, right?
yeah.
And if you just look at our data, right, in India, we're getting 93% sensitivity in our labs right now,
Wow.
right? That's pretty significant.
So the ones that you've done, what is the patient reaction? What is the next step for the patient when they do it? God forbid, it's something they don't want to hear.
Yeah.
What are you seeing them do next?
That's been one of our learnings, right? So let me quote to you what some of the oncologists told us, right?
Right.
Look, as you can imagine, that the oncologist is not our core target for something like this. We've realized that the guys who are more interested are GPs, gynacs, dentists, the guys who actually first suspect something, right?
Okay.
Or families of cancer patients, cancer survivors, right? These people tend to be the most interested in a test like this, right? And I believe this, that anyone who's been touched by cancer or had family that's been touched by cancer, they almost become PhDs of the on this topic,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. Yeah. You
And
have no choice. You have no choice but to.
what plays on everyone's mind is that was there a signal before, right?
Mm.
Because to be very honest with you, because once you realize it, you realize that had you detected it some time back, right,
Yeah.
it was a very different outcome, right?
Correct.
In terms of pain that the person has to go through, the cost to the patient, and so on and so forth, right? So what we've realized is that there are a lot of people that are interested. But having said this, one of the senior oncologists, right, who was talking to us, right, said that, look, we are more interested in the all organ biopsy product than we are in the HRC product.
Hmm.
Uh, there's than the HRC product, right? Now, effectively, um, uh, you know, um,
You're talking
uh,
about the HRC product, the difference. Yeah.
HRC is a screening product. The all
Right.
organ biopsy, we can even tell you that's a sequencing product with which we can also tell you what is the primary, what's the secondary, a lot of other data that is extremely useful for the oncologist, right? But it's a more expensive product, right? But the point here is that they were more interested in that because they are actually the frontline fighters. They are trying to, they are fighting that disease, right, which is
That's right.
growing quickly. So something that can give them data, right, through a non-invasive process, they're more interested in that, right, than someone telling them that, listen, these guys could be imminent cancer. That's not a, they've already got actual live cancer patients. They don't want, at least
Correct.
in a
Correct.
whole lot of, people, right, that are at imminent threat of cancer, right?
Yeah.
But having said this, right, what they did, what he did say was that, if you can actually detect the disease early, right, if you can get me people that are at stage 1 rather than at stage 4, I will be fighting to save the life of the person every time, as opposed to trying to extend life of
Right.
someone, right?
Right.
And that's
Right.
a very, people don't realize what oncologists go through, right? I
Mm.
mean, it's their patient, they know them, right? And to actually fight this losing battle, it's
Mm.
not easy, right, for them.
Mm.
So
Mm.
the reality is that, this is why we feel that we are doing something meaningful,
Yeah.
because
No, there's no
through a
question.
non-invasive process, we're trying to actually warn you early.
So I'm going to ask you another question, which is a very important one. Let's assume you gather tons of data wherever in the world.
Yep,
The natural question is about AI, right? So the opportunity you have here and the potential to then analyze all of the data that you get based
yep.
on demographics, based on the different persona types and so on and so forth is extraordinary. What sorts of technology innovation are you using right now or plan to use where this is not just, I mean, I'll give you an example of, say, 23andMe or Ancestry.com.
Yep.
And I've used the former, right? So, if funny enough, one of my shows earlier, my guest, who's sadly his daughter actually was a victim of the chemotherapy. The cancer didn't take her. The chemotherapy had its side effects, which actually took her life eventually with pulmonary fibrosis. So, there are many who have suffered that. Chemotherapy is like formatting the hard drive. It's a serious thing to do. uh, what's going to be incredible is getting to a point where you have this incredible data set and you're able to now start to predict things, not just in terms of detection. Well, you got it, you don't, you got it, you don't, you got it. Over time, of course, the 1.4 billion Indians that live in India, for example, wow, what a vast database. What's interesting, I find, as someone who's got a dark health past as well, Ashish. So as I listen to you because I've been in many hospital beds over my 25 years since I had my condition, and I continue to take loads of medications and have tests regularly. So I understand where you're coming from. One of the things that's really important is understanding, as in someone who's of an Indian origin living in the West. I'm from the diaspora, but my makeup is Indian essentially. So my environmental factors might not be me living in Mumbai, but I find often when I go to doctors in India or family members, they're able to diagnose at a rapid pace. For me, at least. In fact, that happened to me in 1999, 2000, where I was about to die. I was close to death. And my father was alive then. I forced him to take me to India for some wedding. God knows how I convinced him. I was a good sales guy, and I deteriorated on the plane really badly, in really bad conditions, ulcers in the mouth. I was near death. They got me to Delhi, and I was ill before I went to India, but the doctors here just couldn't figure out in the UK. They were like, I don't know what's wrong with this guy. Like, are you on drugs or something? I said, nope. And they just couldn't figure it out. So I was on some with some gastro consultant, and they were giving me some tablets. Anyway, I got to India, and a close family member who was actually a cardiologist, not even a immunospecialist or rheumatologist, a cardiologist, said he should just, this is back in 1999, just give him steroids straight away, prednisolone straight away. And my dad was like, really, prednisolone? She's like, give it to him straight away because he's on borderline. He may not even make it back. And I took prednisolone and I got well again, and the rest is history. I went back to the UK. They continued the course. And when we asked her why, she said, but we see hundreds of thousands of patients of the same makeup. And this is a common immune disorder, for example. Long story, but the point I'm making is when you do get to that point, Ashish, you're going to be able to help the diaspora as well in other markets, because we do unfortunately have cardiovascular and diabetes at an alarming rate, no matter where you put us in the world, right?
So I'll tell you, I'll tell two things, right?
Yeah.
Firstly, that's so true. The reality is that, look, firstly, Indians are smart doctors, right? I mean, to be very candid with you, I mean, go to any affluent country and you'll find a disproportionate number of Indians as doctors.
Fair play.
But two, what I've realized, as I have a lot of family members who are doctors as well. What they've just said is that, look, the kind of experience that you get, like for example, right? I know the number of operations that one of my family members, and they were the same age, that had done in terms of cataract surgeries, and the other had not even touched the patient, right? In the US, right? Because you've got different legal implications,
Mm-hmm.
right? So, look, experience is its own teacher, right? And that is something that actually, has its benefits. But on the downside, you will also realize that sometimes, you hear a story, right, where, something should not have been done, right, which, given the legal implications of this, would not have happened in the West, but it does happen, right, in India, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, it's like most things. There's a good and a bad side of things, right? And the real solution is somewhere, balance of these solutions, right? But you asked a very important question, when you actually look at, the 23andMe test, or for example, the exome study that was done, right? The 500,000 genome project that was done in the UK.
Yes.
Understand that when you're looking at a DNA, right, it is looking at the propensity to get a disease, right? Because for instance, right,
Correct.
if I do this test, right, it may give me some good fooey facts. Hey, listen, part of my family came from Southeast Asia, or part of my family came from Middle East, which may interest me for 5-10 minutes, and at the end of which, right, it's not that important, right? But it can also give you some useful information. It could tell me that, I'm prone to prostate cancer, I'm prone to diabetes, I'm prone to Alzheimer's, and so on and so forth. In fact, I got a test done like that, which gave me a list of some 60 diseases, right? Which I may or may not get at some point in my life, but I have more chances than getting it than, let's say, you, right?
Right.
Now, what the hell do I do with that data? It's an exercise in depression,
right? It is, yeah.
But I'm being a little facetious because I'm sure, for certain rare diseases, it's good if you know, right, early. But it's not as impactful as being able to say that you're at imminent threat of a disease, right? And that's the distinction that I would expect you to understand when for instance, they may tell me I'm prone to prostate cancer because it may run in my family, right? What it will not tell me is that, listen, I'm also prone to, lung cancer. Why? Because I didn't get any mutations from my parents, right? That made me susceptible. So a DNA test does not show that. But I may be a chain smoker. And if I'm a chain smoker, well, I'll develop those. That does not show up in a exome study, right?
Right.
The thing I'm trying to make to you, right, is that there's a difference between something that is the propensity to get a disease and something that is at imminent threat of a disease, right? What we are about is actually telling you that there's an imminent threat of a disease, right? And that's why we think that this makes a difference, because, and it's an annual test, right? Remember, like I said, for instance, someone may be doing a colonoscopy again because colon cancer runs in my family.
Right.
But I may do this for 5 years running, and then at the end of it, I find out, hey, I don't have colon cancer, but I have brain cancer. Well, that test did not help me, right?
Yeah.
Because I still
Yeah.
got cancer,
Yeah,
right?
it's quite
Like I
isolationist. I mean, this look what you're saying. It's such a no-brainer, right? Let's be honest. What you're saying is such a no-brainer. As in when you get the efficacy working in your favor, in our favor, and you're saving lives. I mean, that's the key thing, right? At the end of the day, we all want to live. We don't want to die, and we don't want to suffer. I mean, human condition is the human condition, but we definitely are not up for suffering. We do it, and we're resilient. We find, the thick skin, and we celebrate the people who battle cancer. But it is a frigging nightmare. Let's be honest. I mean, it's a nightmare from the worst of nightmares ever. And you saw that with your family members as well. So you're on it. Last couple of questions, because this is amazing. So the NHS is about to do it. Hopefully, we'll see it here, and then we'll pay whatever, and they'll figure that out. That's not our lookout. Then tell us a little bit about 5 years go by now. So imagine, let's put ourselves in the future. 5 years have gone by now. It's 2028 now. I'm having this conversation with you again. And I've definitely done the test every year, by the way. This is what we're imagining. Okay. So I'm doing the test, and touch wood, the universe has helped me and I'm well. Where else can you take this is the question.
So to be, firstly, let me, because our passion, we want to do something about cancer, and
Right.
let's just put it in perspective, right? Cancer is today the second largest killer, right? But in the Western world, it's already the number one killer, right?
Mhm.
But like I told you, people don't appreciate that cancer is actually a weak disease so long as you catch it early. The
Mm.
unfortunate fact is that today we detect it late and then we don't know what to do, right? To your point, the medication that you're giving the person is as terrible as the disease because it hammers the tumor, but
Right.
also hammers you, right? If you look at the side effects that the person is going through, right? But why is the medication so harsh? Because you're detecting it when it is you know, it's a roaring disease, right? If you can catch it early, we believe in the medication and the intervention that will happen will be softer, right? So our goal, right, is that and what what's required from us is that we need to make it affordable and we need to make it scalable, right? Please appreciate, and both are both those problems we are working at right now, right? And in that sense, India is a wonderful market to be in,
That's
right?
right.
Because as you know, it's cost sensitive, right? And right, scale is huge, right? So effectively, we are trying to solve, and we have made great progress, right? I mean, even 8 months back, right? We could not do more than 6 to 10 samples a day. Today,
Right.
we are doing 50. By the end of this month or early next month, we expect to be doing 100 samples a day in out of one lab. And then it's a question of having many labs, right?
So is that the limiting factor, the capacity?
Capacity, right? So that is one issue. But the point of the matter is that it's a molecular test, right? So we
Mm.
realize that we want to drive the price down, right? But we need to work with partners. You need to actually have a scalable solution, and we are working towards it. Like I told you,
Right.
the reason we are working on the PCR method is because we've realized that, listen, you lose a little bit on sensitivity, right? But I don't want a solution that is only for the rich. I want all 8 billion of us doing this,
Mm. Mm.
which means that you need to drive that cost down, right? Now, there's a question mark in terms of, from a regulatory perspective, people may want to have the more expensive test
Right.
in the affluent markets, right? But that said, I want that solution, both those solutions, and I want to drive that price down because look, I mean, like anyone that's suffered from cancer, right? Our view is that, listen, if 8 billion people have to do this test once a year, we will make our money,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
But you know what? If you can turn cancer into an early stage disease, now that's something that would actually make all our scientists, all the employees, all of us proud of what we've given back, right?
Yeah.
Because we lost someone very important to us, because of this disease, and I'm not alone. I mean, there are many
Mm.
sad stories, right, with this disease. I can tell you, my wife is Australian. I know of affluent families in
Mm.
in Australia that have lost everything to save one member of the family, and finally they didn't even save that member, right?
Yeah,
But right.
yeah, yeah,
And the point is that our view is that at some point mankind needs to wake up and
yeah.
actually understand what uh, you know you have to have an affordable solution.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. It's bang on. I'm so excited about this and inspired by what you're doing, Ashish, and you have our full support. We have tens of thousands of sort of subscribers and fans here at Straight Talk, and it's growing. And it's a non-profit mission. Like I want to democratize access to knowledge and awareness to over 1 million people in the world. And that generally means an hour's episode might turn into Q&A, like a micro lesson, because a lot of people will learn from what you've said, because sometimes it's too much for someone to take. So we have to have our narrow focus like you do, bit by bit by bit. And, all power to you, my friend, for doing this. I can't wait to get my blood test done in the UK, honestly, because I have a medley of other illnesses. I need to get this one done. Thankfully, I've not had cancer, and hopefully, touch wood, I'll never have it. But I do want to do the blood test because I get a blood test in every couple of weeks for other things, and I'd love to do this and make sure we are a champion and promote the good work that you're doing and tell us how we can help is the most important thing. And as we close off, firstly, where do people find insights on what you're doing? Is there a website? Is there a blog? I mean, where do we find this stuff?
So I mean, you can look at all the three websites. The reality is that we have Tisa Labs, which is the owner of the IP. It's a Singapore-based company.
Right.
The company is Epigeneres Biotech in India, so you can also look at their website. And in the UK, you have hrc .com.uk. So and frankly, if you look at any of our websites, right, there's a lot of data that we do provide. But that said, I mean, it's a big landmark for us that we are actually launching it in multiple markets. But if you ask me what my priority is, my priority number one to number five is getting that clinical study completed, because that's a very big milestone for us.
It is, yeah, yeah, absolutely. I'm sure your dad would be really proud because you've taken whatever he wanted to do to the next level. And I'm sure your brother-in-law in the spirit realm is probably observing what's going on. And I'm sure, your other family members who've also experienced loss. I had your brother earlier on, and he expressed his sadness at the past. It's so important we just demonstrate how we're moving forward with solutions, with actions, as much as theory and intellectual conversations over a bottle of wine or whatever it may be. You must keep in touch with us and keep telling us what you're doing and why you're doing it and where's it going. We will absolutely promote the work. And before I go, just 5 seconds, how was the experience for you today? We spoke after a long time, but first time I've had you on my show. How did it go for you today? You shared so much insight, which that we're grateful for, of
You
course.
have a wonderful and calm manner in which you actually bring out the story. And to be very candid with you, in most of the presentations that it's focused only on the science bit. And I like the fact that you actually bring out the personal side, because and in my opinion, that leaves an imprint on people, because um, you know when you can identify with the situation, people proactively try and see how you can help. And To that extent, it's such a pleasure. It was a pleasure catching up with you, and
Yeah, absolutely.
in London. And we had decided that we would definitely have a meeting soon. And I know, because of Christmas and so on and so forth, it got slightly delayed, but I'm so glad that
Yeah,
it
no,
happened.
the timing's everything in life, right? And as you know, the timing's right. And when you do get the approvals and you do your clinical trials, we'll get you back on the show, more from the point of view of making sure that the message goes out to people in the UK. Of course, in India, you're doing a lot of good work. I've seen you on the TV channels. so people in the UK can go and get this private test done. Because I can tell you, anyone who's experienced any form of cancer loss and so on will want to get the test done, whatever the price point may be. I'm sure our government, the new government, the old government who's going to become the new or the new will subsidize this for us, because gosh, there is a lot of work to be done in the NHS. So listen, Godspeed, take care, may the force be with you, and look after yourself, Ashish. Thank you for coming on the show.
Really pleasure.
Real pleasure.